panic is really a subjective sensation that something is very, very wrong and you're in extreme danger. And when people experience it, they feel overwhelmed, like something very terrible is about to happen. So people with panic problems can't make sense of why they're panicking. They say this thing comes out of the blue. This is a very common statement that is made by people with anxiety problems. This thing comes out of the blue, and I don't know what it is. It's all very mysterious to me. So that's how the sensation of high anxiety, extreme anxiety, can be perceived. It's something that's very dangerous. In fact, anxiety itself can be perceived as dangerous because anxiety can lead to panic. And anxiety is frowned upon. The person who has an anxiety problem frowns upon experiencing anxiety or experiencing any negative emotion, thinks of it in bad terms, like it's not a normal thing. So when clients first come here and I start to introduce them to new ideas, one of the new ideas is, have you ever thought that anxiety is a good thing? And the universal answer is, I want to know one good thing about anxiety. There's no such thing as good anxiety, you know. Whereas anxiety is an essential part of human life. You know, we can't negotiate our daily transactions, you know, the vicissitudes of life, the dangers in life. We can't even cross a street without anxiety. We should have anxiety. Anxiety is a good thing. But clients don't believe that. They have a firm belief that's well established in their subconscious minds that negative emotions are bad and anxiety is bad. What happens is something, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but vicious cycles are very, very prominent with emotional problems. And panic is often the result of a vicious cycle between simple anxiety, simple everyday, regular anxiety, and how it is processed by the person who ends up having a problem with anxiety, which is typical. It has a typical typical style of processing, which says anxiety is bad, anxiety is abnormal, anxiety is unacceptable, anxiety is something that I have to control, anxiety is something that I have to get rid of. Now, all these put together don't help the anxiety. They don't lessen the intensity of the anxiety or anything like that. In fact, they make you more anxious. The more you try to control anxiety, the more anxious you're going to get because anxiety is not something you can control. So a vicious cycle means that the more you talk to yourself this way, the worse the anxiety gets, the more intense and uncontrollable it gets. The more that happens, the more you talk to yourself the same way. You see, the more you try to control it, let's say, and you try to get rid of it. And say, this is terrible, what's happened to me, this has to stop. And all this can happen within a second or half a second. This vicious cycle, you know, anxiety, control, whoosh, 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 and the person is panicking and can't explain why. Because the style of processing is not available. It's not accessible. So the person can't say, well, what's happening to me here? Maybe it's because I'm trying to control anxiety that I'm panicking. They don't say that. They just say something terrible is happening and I don't know what it is. It must be something very abnormal about me. It develops a high degree of automaticity. It happens when they least expect it, especially. So a typical person suffering from an anxiety problem, panic disorder with agoraphobia, goes to the mall. We've talked about that, I think, before. goes to the mall, and then starts to get anxious and she doesn't know why she's anxious, because nobody's anxious around her. Everybody seems to be having a lot of fun. But she's anxious and can't make sense of it. What is really happening that she's not making sense of it is that she's suffering from a separation anxiety. She's not comfortable in her comfortable home, in her comfortable armchair, watching TV. She's away, out there where it's not very safe, and she doesn't even know why that is the case. But what she says is that she's afraid of having a heart attack or having a panic attack, and a panic attack might lead to a stroke or something like that. So she goes to the mall, and all this is swirling around in her head. and she says, I hate this. I don't want this. I can't make sense of it. So it's very alarming. Alarm is a very prominent part of this. And the immediate thought is, I have to get out of here. It's a very common human response to high anxiety, to elevated levels of stress. If that were her only problem, she would just leave, go home where she's safe, so no problem. But that's not what happens. What happens is she has an extreme panic attack. And I think we need to explain why these panic attacks are so common to people who have agoraphobia. There are a lot of theories. There's something physiologically wrong or biochemically wrong. Brain chemistry is not working well. There are all kinds of theories. I think what accounts best for panic attacks, for agoraphobics anyway, but also for other types of anxiety disorders, is that people get into double binds. What she is saying she's saying, I can't stay here, I have to leave. That's very clear, everybody knows that. But what is not clear, and what clients don't volunteer to tell their therapists, is that at the same time she's saying that, she knows she's saying that subconsciously and hates that. She doesn't want to leave because leaving is a cowardly thing to do. It's not a normal thing to do. People don't leave from malls if they're uncomfortable. They have to stay. So she's caught in a double bind. She has to leave because she's very uncomfortable, and she's afraid it's going to get out of hand. But she also has to stay because nobody in their right mind would leave a situation like that. That's a double bind. So she's basically trapped. Nobody's telling her she has to leave or has to stay. But she's doing that. She's saying two opposite things that are mutually exclusive at the same time. And she feels trapped. When humans feel trapped, they panic. It's a very, very understandable thing. And when people panic, they want to flee. So the net result of all this is that usually the person in that situation flees and says, I'm never going to go back there again. Because if I go back there again, I'm going to panic. And I don't want that to happen. So that's the double bind. An extension of the double bind is even more interesting. It's the multiple bind. A multiple bind means that this same person is saying to herself or himself, I can't stay and I can't leave. But she also says, I can't stay and leave later, or leave and come back later, or call a friend of mine. So, there are all kinds of options that you can consider, if you're in a pickle. And if you're in a highly anxious state, you have really multiple options. The multiple bind means that the person doesn't give themselves any options at all. She can't stay, she can't leave, she can't stay and leave later, she can't leave and come back later. She can't call a cab to take her home. She can't call her husband or significant other to come and rescue her because that's very shameful. All these options are unacceptable because they're imperfect. They smack of failure. And to a person who's a perfectionist, and it's really invariably the case that people with emotional problems are perfectionists. To a person who's a perfectionist, failure is unacceptable. So staying and leaving later is unacceptable. That's a failure too. Leaving is unacceptable. Avoidance is unacceptable. People who have anxiety problems are very, very unhappy about their avoidances. They don't want to avoid. Now, they don't say that, but if you ask them, they'll tell you, oh yeah, I hate this avoidance. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what makes me escape from a place where I'm not in danger. I really have not seen emotional problems that are devoid of double binds. For example, this example, we're elaborating on one example, but there are many, many examples that we should probably go into. In this example, the client is encouraged to be flexible, okay? Perfectionists are not very flexible. You know, there's a all or nothing thinking. You know, I either do it well or I don't do it at all, you know, so they think like that. So to encourage flexibility is very important. So in that situation, the person who's experiencing all this can say, you know, it's all right if I stay a while longer. Maybe I'll habituate to the environment of being at a mall or a supermarket or wherever she is. Maybe not. It's all right. If I don't, that's okay. I can always leave whenever I want. Now, the avoidance is looked upon so badly by her and by society in general, you know, and even by mental health professionals. You must never avoid. And she tells herself that already. I must never avoid, that she's really stuck. So the way to help her is to say, no, you can leave anytime you want. I remember earlier in my career, I used to do a lot of in vivo therapy, which means I go with the client to the situation that they're afraid of so that we can work on it right there. So let's say we're at the mall and, you know, she's feeling trapped. She can't stay. She can't leave. I tell her, no, you can leave. There. The exit is right there. Shall we practice leaving? And then she finds that funny, you know. She doesn't expect the therapist to tell her that because she expects the therapist to tell her, no, you got to stay here and sweat it out, you know. No, you can leave, you can stay, you can do whatever you want. And that sense of freedom liberates her from the double bind and the multiple bind. And once she feels free that she can do whatever she wants, then she calms down. In that situation, she is really afraid that she's going to have a moral collapse of some kind. You know, she's going to fail. She won't be able to stay and do something that anybody should be able to do in their right mind. So she's so against feeling bad about failure. She's so ashamed of that she exerts a lot of effort to stay when she doesn't need to, because she's not trapped. It's like she's not allowing herself. She's not willing to be imperfect. She's not willing to be uncomfortable. I mean, when you ask a person, I used to ask people who don't have anxiety problems, what would happen if you went to the mall or if you went to a social gathering and you were uncomfortable? What would you do? They give me a kind of a funny look. What do you mean what I would do? I would leave. I say, just like that? You know, yeah, I'll just leave. And you won't be afraid of developing a problem because of your avoidance? What are you talking about? People who don't have emotional problems give themselves a lot of leeway. You know, they're not so hard on themselves. People with emotional problems are very hard on themselves. They don't have options, very inflexible with what's available for them. So they're constantly constrained, feeling trapped, stuck. Is to give yourself options. In the case of the agoraphobic at the mall, I can stay, I can leave, I can stay and leave later, I can leave and come back later. I can do whatever I want to make myself comfortable. There's nothing bad about trying to be comfortable. Now, the same thing happens with people with social anxiety disorder, with generalized anxiety disorder, with obsessive compulsives, with depressed people. Double binds permeate their way of thinking. They're very prevalent. For example, somebody with social anxiety disorder is at a staff meeting, just to give you an example. At the staff meeting, he gets anxious, all right? Because he doesn't want to be anxious in front of people, and he's very self-conscious and is afraid of being scrutinized. And doesn't want to be anxious because he's afraid that if he shows anxiety, he's going to be criticized. So he does his best to control his anxiety, to control his thoughts, which takes a lot of effort. And then he can't participate in the discussion at the staff meeting and so on. There's so much stuff swirling in his head that he is so uncomfortable. Could even have a panic attack because of all that and has to leave. But then that tells himself, I can't leave. Double bind. Multiple bind. I can't stay a while longer and see how this works out. I can't leave and come back later. Like, who's going to care, But the person cares and thinks that somehow everybody will know that he has an anxiety problem and will shame him, He left the staff meeting, That's a no-no. I remember in a group once, somebody had that problem, and I said, why can't you leave? And he said, I can't leave. There's no way I can leave. Now, he's saying something else. He's not literally saying that. He's saying something like, if I leave, it has terrible consequences. My boss might not like it or whatever. There'll be a lot of shame involved. So I say, you really literally cannot leave? He says, yeah, I cannot leave. Can I show you how? And I sort of get out of my chair and show him how to leave. And remember, he looked at me dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that I would tell him that. Because he thought that I would share his belief that escape from a situation like this, even if it's just a temporary escape. I mean, people could think he's going to the bathroom or so what, But no, his theory is that escape is a sign of collapse, of total failure, and that must not happen. So he stays in the staff meeting in this double bind again. He can't stay and he can't leave. Panic. Double binds happen with depressed people. They often come to therapy not knowing why they're depressed. They can't really make sense of it. They just talk about their symptoms. I can't sleep, I'm always sad, things aren't going well, my mood is always down, I feel heavy, I can't feel things anymore. As the therapy goes on, you will find the double bind somewhere. And sometimes it becomes very obvious. The person starts to talk about problems at work, for example. I hate my boss. I don't like my job. I hate it. I want to leave. But I don't know where to go. See, it's the same story. I don't know where to go. I don't have skills, other skills. This is the only thing I know how to do. So he has to go to work, and he has to get out of there. That's the same kind of situation. People who are in bad relationships, they want to get out of there, but they can't because they don't know where to go. They say, well, nobody will accept me the way I am. I'm not acceptable. So they have to stay, but they can't stand the relationship. They have to leave. You could say, I'm looking at all my options and I can't find a good one. But what a person does in that situation is say, they evaluate their options. They're not looking for perfect. See, somebody doesn't have a problem, doesn't get into a problem, isn't looking for a perfect solution. Somebody who develops a problem is looking for a perfect solution and can't find one. So that person can be encouraged to see that they're not as trapped as they think they are. They can't stay in the marriage, let's say in the relationship, a while longer and see how it goes. They can get relationship therapy because they say, well, we've done that and it didn't work. Or they can leave, or they can separate. They have really multiple options, but they don't think they do. They tell themselves that they don't. And that's what makes them feel trapped and therefore depressed. Somebody who gives themselves options works on evaluating these options and eventually comes up with the best available one, even though it's not a very good one. They need to be encouraged to be accepting of their feelings. The feelings are not a problem. In fact, the feelings are very informative. They're telling them all kinds of things if they're willing to listen, you know. And they're putting too little effort on what needs to be done. For example, to evaluate their options, to engage in problem solving, perhaps to see a counselor to help them, to make decisions, to see an attorney. If, for example, they're thinking of divorcing their spouse, that's where the effort should go, not in controlling and manipulating their feelings. Too much effort is put into that. And that comes from, again, from something in the culture, you know, from folk mythology. Tells you that the more the better. And when you have a problem, the more effort you put into it, the better results you'll get, which is not correct.